I'm coming. Ah, hello. Come in, come in. I am Yesteris, keeper of the sacred library. You must be here about the tiny bookcase. Then follow me. I've sent 2 adventurers out to find stories. So join me here by my crystal ball, and let us see where they are now.
But the elephant just wouldn't do it.
Was it a moral objection?
Ideological, I believe.
Look, I'm here to tell a wizard some stories, not get drunk and wax lyrical about the motivations of pachyderms.
Huh. How strange. He usually chimes in about now.
Damn wizards, you not a timekeeper between them.
Ah, here he is.
Dear, dear boys, not another tavern of ill repute? What's the given name for this carousing den?
The Sporadic Hair Inn.
Oh, another acquaintance. Who might you happen to be?
I'm Pete K. Malley. I'm a stand-up comic, compere, author, and a rock DJ.
A master of his art.
And a damn fine drinker.
Very well. There will perhaps be some stories imminently. I am delirious with anticipation.
Well, we've never kept a wizard waiting yet. Nico, this week the prompt is in the box.
Tally-ho then. Grag Ramskull closed his heavily calloused digits around the few inches of jutting crag that remained above him. The bitter winds at this altitude whipped his cloak violently, until it had seemed to become some spectre attempting to drag him from the cliff face, its once velvety hands now icy daggers around his throat. With a heave that drew an animalistic roar from his ragged lungs, he pulled his muscular body onto the ledge. Before him stood an obsidian mass, carved into the shape of some terrible skull. Its eyes flickered with green flame, and its great maw was spiked with the promise of an iron portcullis. Grag smiled, reaching back to clasp the handle of his great blade, the sword of Agon Mathar. As his ice-cold fingers squeezed the familiar leather wrapping, his mind drifted back to his first discovering the legendary weapon. He had awoken from the dream state, another of his powerful visions showing the great battle that would come. The Valkyrie soared above him, and he tore apart the abominations that had burned and salted his homeland. When his eyes had opened, before him was a wooden box, carved from mahogany so dark it seemed to drain the light from the space around it. Its intricately carved brass hinges and clasp glinted softly by the light of his torch. They were like eyes, staring out of the dark shroud of night. When Grag opened it, he was met with wonder. A sword, although that is too simple a word for the majesty that he beheld. Its blade was bright as the first burst of the sunrise, and coloured through with purple shades that seemed to dance along the 5 feet of steel. The leather that bound the handle was a rich crimson, so it would not show the stains. Grag lifted it gently from its home and held it in one hand. So light it was that he could have been holding a needle-thin rapier. Yet with each practiced swing he took, he could feel the deadly heft of it, singing its promise of foes rended. Carved along the blade were a series of runes that Grag did not know. They did not have the sharp edges of his people's words, or the criss-crossing flow of the elves. They were new, and almost stung his eye to look upon, leaving their fierce shapes impressed upon the retina. Grag sought out the wizard Klendar, a wizened creature, bound to his chair by old age. Klendar looked as though he'd been made by some great monster dragging damp cloth across bones and pulling it taut. His eyes looked upon Grag from sunken holes, like wary beasts growling at the entrance to its lair. Laying before the wizard his tribute, a bundle of sweet lilac that grew on the fringes of the Hagenmoor, and the heart of an infant chimera, Grag had raised up the blade and asked his question. "What do these runes mean, ancient spell slinger?" Klendar seemed to look upon them unseeing, before his beard split beneath the nose, revealing a series of yellowed and cracked teeth. "This blade lacks power, boy. This is the script of the necromancer, Satoon." Satoon. Satoon the Dread. Satoon the Merciless. Satoon had been a terrible story to tell your infants, if only to take away your very adult fear that he may come upon your village in the night, rip your soul from your body to power his dark magic, and then manipulate your lifeless limbs into fighting his unholy wars for him. "Seek him out, child, for only he may give the answer to the secret of the blade's power." Grag had taken these words like a squire receiving his master's sword. They were heavy and unwieldy, and could quite easily bring his doom. With a swift flick of his own legendary sword, Grag took the throat from Klendar's body. It slumped slightly, but did not fall from its chair. Grag saw this as a mercy, a favour for a favour. His path was now set. The quest to find the dread necromancer had been arduous. Scores of foes had fallen before Grag's might. Great swathes of chittering bone soldiers had surrounded him like an endless tide of death, and yet, with the sword of Agon Mathar in his hand, he had cleaved through their armour and bone like it was soft cheese. He'd drawn the lost name of the necromancer's keep from the lips of a gibbering flesh golem. Its wall of stitched faces all pleaded for the mercy Grag was eager to bring them. They'd whispered from many mouths with promises of power and greatness. They had tried to trick Grag's mind and lead him to a path of wickedness. He had carved them until they spoke only truth. Even now, he wore the dozen skulls that had held its many minds as a necklace to warn any other who would dare stand against him. The journey to the Skull Keep had been fraught with danger. Grag had crossed the salted water in a rickety ship, fighting ocean serpents with fangs as long as 2 men. Grag had weathered the biting sands of the raw expanse. His lips had cracked and his skin had burned, but yet he carved a path of destruction through that desolate place. Grag had climbed the World's Teeth mountains, digging furrows in the ice with his hands and gripping the mountainside, daring it to kill him, daring anything to try and kill him in this time. With this he had found himself there, before the Skull Keep, his blade in hand and the great necromancer's doom in his heart. Then he could go and avenge his kin. Then he could become the hero he'd sworn to his dying father he would become. Point first, Grag entered the foul dwelling. The air in here was thick and muggy, like walking through a monster's rancid breath. His mind swam with images of festering mounds of flesh. All of his hair seemed to bristle with rage. As he moved deeper into the fortress, he felt a surprising air of calm. It occurred to him that not once had he encountered a trap, a guard, or even a patch of darkness. Even as he thought this, he found himself looking into a grand throne room. Sat upon the high-backed chair was horror incarnate. Streams of green fire licked between the bones of our gargantuan skeletal king. His eyes, even seated, were some 10 feet from the ground, and bored into Grag as though we were filled with diamonds. "Satoon the Dread, I have come to kill you!" Grag roared at his foe, who began to slowly stand. It was gargantuan, this monster of unliving magic, wound about with the banners of defeated armies, hung here and there with the trinkets of 1,000 decimated kingdoms. "You may try, little mortal. I see you bring an ancient blade. Have you power enough within it to kill me?" Grag braced himself against the ice-like fingers gripping his heart. "I will strike you down, Death Mage, and use your soul gem to fill this blade and take back my land." "Wait, what?" The necromancer looked confused, a pattern written strangely upon its skull. "What the fuck is a soul gem?" Crag paused. The gem containing your corrupted souls. It powers this sword. I've got a lot of gems with souls in them, but that sword takes batteries. 6 AAAs. Crag bared his teeth. You lie. No, dude, seriously, I double-checked the box when I sent these out. Please tell me you put them in the handle. Crag shifted from one foot to the other. Sent them out? I looked up every idiot who was currently questing and mailed them one of these. I actively want to die. My existence is pain. You don't think it was weird I was unguarded? I mean, gods, my house is shaped like a skull. I'm not being subtle. Crag had let the point of his sword droop. He felt it bump gently against the stone floor. So, there are batteries in the box it came in. He raised an eyebrow. Yes, there might be some in my kitchen drawer, right in the back and to the left. Crag did not head into the back and to the left. The calls of the necromancer followed him down the hall. Pussy! And stupid ass not bringing the batteries with you, ass bitch! Carried through the abandoned halls of the keep. Crag sighed as the ice-cold wind outside hit him. Fuck necromancers, he thought. He was busy saving his family or his land or whatever, anyway. He was probably right. Yeah, that's right. I just used 1,200 words to waste time setting up a joke, and what?
I did actually really enjoy it. Like even the like the heroic fantasy first 2/3. You know, like that really felt like waves of fantasy. Yeah, like you distilled a bigger book into a short story, and then the turn was fantastic, really funny.
All done to make it all the more painful when it finally was turned against you, Ben.
I loved it. I thought it was great. I loved it as well because I didn't expect it, and I was really getting sucked into the fantasy. It reminded me of I can't remember his name. It's Stephen Erickson book cover. Is that right? You know, the kind of really, and the tone was fantastic. I loved it.
I've never actually read a Stephen Erickson book.
I've not, but I've loved the covers.
There is something to fantasy covers, isn't there? Like
yeah.
There was the old-fashioned style where they were super busy with everything that was going on. Sometimes the art didn't quite match what was happening in the story.
I mean, Discworld is numero uno for that, right?
Discworld, like Robin Hobb series, even Game of Thrones to a certain degree. You look at the covers of the early 90s versions, and you've got, who the fuck is that? I've got no idea who that is.
I do love that kind of fantasy art, though. I love an oil painting of a wolf screaming at a barbarian. Like I'm down for that all the time.
Those were so much better than how they are now, which is just like one block of like gradient color with a single object
with
in
a
front
symbol,
of it,
a symbol that represents. They make it look like
Yeah.
Like some sort of romantic fiction. It does my head, and I want to see a fucking dragon.
Well, there you go.
They do. Have you noticed they do a thing now as well? They have a watermark and then they emboss the watermark on the design, and that's what the cover is. So, which one of these things is this? Is this meant to be glaringly obvious or very subtle?
I think it's meant to get. You know what it's like? It's kind of like, well, let's make this look academic and proper, but at the end of the day, it's a book about dragons and castles, and I love that. Don't get me wrong.
Yeah.
You don't have to, and don't think you have to justify it by putting on a poncy cover. Just it is what it is. You know, and I think bands have started doing it as well. Everybody's done it, and I just think we're just trying to justify that we're embarrassed to read a book about a dragon and a eel or something.
Or maybe, possibly, it's the sort of marketing people assuming that people would be embarrassed, and therefore they're doing something middle of the road so that like a regular person that hasn't necessarily read fantasy before will pick it up off the shelf.
I don't want to derail too hard now, but I think this actually goes back to Harry Potter. In the first printing, they did children's covers and adults covers, didn't they? So Philosopher's Stone had a photo of a black and white photo of a steam engine on the front. And I mean, now you can't even imagine people being embarrassed about reading Harry Potter. It's one of the biggest book franchises on the planet. But
yeah,
the fact that they thought people will enjoy this, but we need to make it look adult friendly.
Stephen King, I'm a big Stephen King fan, and they've done it as well. And I understand you don't want some cartoony picture of a vampire. But that's all fine. But then you don't need equally a poncy picture of some sort of Key and Lock, which the book's about a dog that eats people. I don't really, it's, I don't know. But maybe I'm at the age now that I don't care what people think, but unfortunately people do care what people think. So maybe, the fantasy, I love, like the Erikson books I never really read, but I love to look at the covers and I wanted to read them. And I hate when you buy a set of books, like a series of books, and like the Robin Hobb ones, I've got like a whatever it could be any generic, and I go, God, come on, just show me a picture of an eel and a weird man and a dragon and something, don't know.
Yeah.
And a sword with blood coming from it or something. I don't know. But yeah.
Definitely. Yeah, I have a version of the first Robin Hood book from the Assassin. I think it's called The Assassin's Apprentice, and it's got a wizard on the front. There's no wizard in that story. Like there's no like, but he's like this grand magus. It looks like Merlin or something. It's fantastic. Love it.
Right, we're getting stuck. We're getting stuck on story 1. We have so much to cover. Ben, tell us a story, love.
Yeah, I'll give it a go. Just give me a second to vet my whistle.
It's the worst porn film I've ever seen.
Would you like to vet my whistle?
Mein Gott. Mein Liebling, your whistle is so tight.
Schnitzel loving fool. In the box. Garstang really needed things to start going well. It hadn't always been this way. Back in the day, he had been able to reliably count on things always working out. Not anymore. It hadn't been that way for some time, as they dragged their asses along muddy trails. At the small fires they made to ward off the wolves and the chilly nights, he found himself pondering at what point fate had turned against him. It weighed on him, like a sack full of coins he couldn't spend. He and his band of what could be mendaciously referred to as soldiers of fortune had trudged a trail back and forth across the continent. They had found work for their blades in every major city, most of the large forests, and even occasionally on battlefields. There had been a time when their clothes and their boots were good, when their coin purses were so full that their balls were always nearly empty. When what did it matter in the end? Garstang didn't know what he missed more, good horse or good boots. A rare smile crossed his broad face as he remembered the boy who'd sold his mouth upstairs whilst his father mended Garstang's boots downstairs. That had been years ago, but that was surely the best of times. Father and son had both been exceptional at their craft. Garstang felt an uncomfortable swelling in his breeches at the thought. He hadn't had a usable rod in months, and now, when it was of no use to him at all, here it was. He frowned and punched it lightly, but that seemed to only invigorate it. You all right, boss? Garstang looked up at One-Eyed Roz. The two of them were sheltering under a leaking canopy outside a tavern. Garstang was of the private opinion that the master of this house almost certainly mixed piss in with the beer to make it go further. But it was all he could afford for his men. He knocked back his mug of ale and heard the assorted necklaces he wore jangle pleasantly. Why, yes. My cock is never wrong. Some good fortune is coming our way, young Roz. From inside, he could hear his men fighting again. He hoped some of them would kill each other, so that when payday came around, he wouldn't have to be light again. When he was a boy, being a soldier of fortune had sounded incredibly grand. Then he grew up and came to the knowledge that being a mercenary showed you the frailties of the civilized world. Now, so many years on that he dared not utter them aloud for fear of being struck down by a god that had forgotten his time was up, he knew that the life of a bandit held almost no value to the world. He was the walking embodiment of everything that was wrong with humanity, and every breath he drew was a plague on the lives of others. As the gloom descended on him, Garstang realised he had been playing with his dagger, pressing it under his unshaved chin, subconsciously seeking a way out of this grey world filled with grey people. Then he saw it. A horse of impeccable breeding had entered the muddy town centre. Both the horse and the fine tack upon it was slick with the rain, but Garstang could smell the money from 30 paces. He slowly laid his dagger on the ramshackle table in front of him, wiped the beads of rainwater from his face, and patted his crotch. Well done, old boy. The rider appeared to be well dressed, if his dark blue cloak was anything to go by. Garstang's sight wasn't what it used to be, but he judged the man to be a capable fighter from the way he sat his horse. That was an inconvenience, but not a large one. Garstang's small grey eyes followed the scene with predatory intensity. He watched as the man stabled his horse at the big inn across the way and went inside. Before he disappeared, Garstang studied the man. He seemed to have no gear with him, no large weapons or armour. He did, however, sling his saddlebags over one shoulder with a practiced movement. Under his right arm, held beneath his cloak to shelter it from the rain, was a box. The man seemed particularly careful with that item. Garstang could feel his fate turning once more. At long last he felt excitement and hopefulness rush through him. He had some time before payday, and some coin to gamble on the endeavour. "Roz, gather the boys. We're changing inns." "Yes, boss." Roz wasn't the brightest person to have ever followed Garstang. Gone were the days of bright lieutenants eagerly finding opportunities to curry favour with him. Roz could just about count to 30, which is more than the rest of the illiterates that followed him these days could do, and that made her Garstang's second. She scurried inside and started shouting for the men. Garstang bought his men a round of pleasant-smelling beer. The tavern keeper of the respectable establishment had initially objected to their rough appearance, but had soon fetched the ale when he waved the last of his coin at her. He had waved it as though he had 2 or 3 more purses. In his experience, people preferred to deal with a man who doesn't look like he needs the money, rather than the one that is outwardly a pauper. As the men settled in on their best behaviour, Garstang strode through the crowded tavern to where the well-dressed man was nursing a wooden goblet of wine. He decided to open his mouth and see where the talk took him. "Wine does a man good after a long ride, eh, squire?" "Indeed." "Where you headed?" "Kingsburg." "On your own? Dangerous road ahead." "I will be fine." "We're headed that way ourselves. Could offer you a discount." "A discount?" "For protection. A fine gentleman such as yourself. There are marauders along those cliff roads." "Marauders, is it?" The man looked around the tavern, seeming to know each of the ruffians Garstang had mustered. "Very well. I am Cosmead." "Happy to have met you, Cosmead. I'm Garstang, and these are my soldiers of fortune." The 2 men locked gazes, and Garstang couldn't help but feel that this Cosmead was under no illusions as to what was about to happen to him. The man held out his hand to seal the compact. Garstang gripped it quickly, and smiled as wide as the scar upon his lip would allow. It had been 2 days, and Garstang wasn't so sure his luck had turned for the better anymore. The road so far had been full of travellers, and they had stayed in well-appointed inns at Cosmead's insistence, and of course his coin. No opportunities to rob the man blind had presented themselves. What really slammed the cork in Garstang's bottle was that fucking box. He had seen the occasional glimpse of it, but the man kept it too close to his person for Garstang to be able to sneak a peek. He had waited and waited. Up ahead, the steep road flattened out into a wide bend. On the right side was a scree-covered outcrop, obstructing a view of the next piece of road, and on the left was a 300-foot drop into foaming rapids. The noise of the thundering falls below was an intense sound even from this distance. It was then that Garstang realised their party was alone. No traders, travellers, or even royal patrols to be seen. He quickly gave the order for a couple of the men to go ahead and look around the bend for anyone. As the younger lads did that, he walked closer to Cosmead's horse and nodded to Roz. The woman winked at him in return, or possibly she was simply blinking her remaining eye. The lads hooted from around the bend to indicate they were clear. Garstang cleared his throat and drew his sabre and dagger. "Unfortunately, this is where we part ways, fucker." Garstang watched as the man turned in the saddle to look at him. There was no fear on his face, but Garstang noticed his eyes suddenly change colour. They were now glowing with a strange purple and orange light. "Bugger!" Something hit him in the chest. The force of the blow picked him up and tossed him backwards. His dagger spun from his hand, but he managed to keep a grip on the long sabre. He bounced on the scree as he fell, feeling it cut him, and eventually slid to a stop. Groggily, Garstang shook his head before raising it. Cosmead had taken a small electrum rod from his cloak, and with some unknowable twitch of his wrist, the rod had telescopically extended from both ends until it was a thin staff. As Garstang's men attacked him with axes, spears, and swords, the man danced his fine horse in defensive circles whilst lashing out with the ends of his staff. Garstang saw Roz get her spear in the horse's side. She was rewarded for her trouble by instantly being wreathed in flames with a wave of the electrum staff. The tongues of the flames that sloughed her armour, clothes, and skin from her bones were of the same colouring of Cosmede's eyes. The others, too stupid to run, continued their attack, near 30 men and women in total, and this Cosmede was holding them all at bay. Just. Garstang patted his own chest, wondering why he wasn't dead when he could see what was happening to the others when they caught a blast from Cosmede. The wooden amulet he had bought from a soothsayer whilst drunk the last time he had been in Kingsburg was hot to the touch. Perhaps his luck was changing after all. Garstang picked himself back up and charged in. This time he weaved between his own lads, even shoving a few towards Cosmede until he flanked the mage. With a cry, he leapt forwards, both hands upon his sabre's hilt. Cosmede turned, but it was too late. Garstang's sabre snatched both of the mage's hands off at the wrists. The staff instantly burst into shining white fragments of metal that slashed through the surrounding men. Garstang was rendered momentarily blind, but he had heard the horse start awkwardly away from him, and he hopelessly groped for the saddlebag he knew the box was in. With a jerk, he was once more taken off his feet as his fingers closed on the leather straps. The horse, no doubt blinded as well, was bucking wildly upon the edge of the cliff. As his own sight returned, Garstang looked up into the horrified face of the now handless mage. "How?" the man managed to force through gritted teeth. "Just lucky, I guess," barked back Garstang as he tore the box from out of the saddlebag. As he did so, he heard one of the horse's legs land badly. There was a snap, and then both horse and rider were falling, leaving Garstang stood upon the lip of the cliff. His eyes still sore from the explosion, he watched as the water claimed them, but not before the jagged rocks that jutted from the cliff wall had smashed them about on the way down. Garstang frowned to see it. "Bad way to go." Around him, the remainder of his men were picking themselves up from the fight. He had lost 20 or so by his quick count. "Did anyone know that bastard were a mage?" The dullards shook their heads at him. "Fuck me. Right. Start picking through the dead. They could have a watery burial along with the mage." The lad set to the task as he studied the box he still clutched. It was made from heavy and highly polished dark wood. The lid was inlaid with iridescent nacre. The mage's fat coin purse and fine horse were of course long gone, but it was all worth it for this. Garstang opened it. Letters, perhaps 15 of them, on faded parchment. Garstang felt his heart sink as he shoved them aside to look for the gems. There were none to be found, just the letters. With panic rising, he slyly glanced about at the men he knew he could no longer afford to pay, and then set to skimming the words. They were love letters, old ones too. Garstang struggled for a moment, but couldn't stop the word from coming out of his mouth. "Fuck." "Something wrong, Captain?" A nearby thug had wandered over and was grimly staring at the sheaf of papers in Garstang's hand. At his words, the others stopped their jobs and looked over as well. Garstang became uncomfortably aware of how well armed they all were. Not at all, lad. These here are spells. They'll fetch fat coin in Kingsburg." The relief from the men was palpable. As Garstang felt his heart slowing down again, he thanked his stars that he'd surrounded himself with men who couldn't read. But then again, he had always had good fortune.
I really enjoyed that, man. Obviously a bit of a Game of Thrones vibe, because that's you.
Yeah, I was looking. I was pushing more in the sort of Joe Abercrombie vein, but it definitely has more of like the advanced civilization of not the advanced, like the medieval civilization of Game of Thrones to it for sure.
I know we've had them a couple of times already on the podcast, but in our history of writing together and doing role play games together, you write that kind of cutthroat bastard character really well.
They speak to me, Nick. What can I say?
They speak to you. But yeah, that getting that little bit of internal shit when things are going south, and then having him spin it made for really compelling storytelling. Like switching between the kind of fast-paced, low fantasy action, and then his internal monologue, and then being so distinct, made that really, really enjoyable for me.
Yeah, I really liked it as well. I was much the same. I think the Abercrombie thing comes through it. Do you know what it is? It's kind of that old traditional fantasy with that the dialogue's quite modern, and you just put a modern twist on it. I really enjoyed it. It's very good, great.
I'm glad. I enjoy just sort of throwing a bit more of, like, as you say, like a modern way of speaking in with some fairly heavy swearing and stuff. I also managed to, you guys probably already knew it, but I managed to teach myself a new word during this, because I was I was going to inlay the box with Mother of Pearl, and I was like, that sounds so weak. So I I had a quick Google around, but it turns out another name for Mother of Pearl is Nacre, Nacre,
I like that.
which is a much better word than Mother of Pearl. And it turns out it's one of the strongest things in nature as well. There's it's like this coating that's made from like argonite, suffused with like an organic bonding.
That obviously is not
anyway.
known, because if it was known, every single rock band in the world would be called it.
It's mine. I'm having it.
You've
It's
done
mine.
it. He's grabbed it. Nacre.
Taking it. It's mine.
Well, that can be your third studio album.
Oh, hell yeah. I think it's really interesting. Obviously, I can't speak for what Pete's going to tell us, but that we both landed on fantasy. Different ends of the spectrum, but there's the first time that we've both ended up with even a vague link, I'd say, between our stories.
Yeah, I've the last few that I've done haven't really been fantasy. In fact, have I done a fantasy one?
I don't think either of us have until now. I did sort of.
Oh yeah. More sort of sci-fi and more sort of like real world stuff that I've been doing, which is a total departure for me because I normally write stuff like this. So yeah, it was. I think it was quite nice to get you to do the heroic fantasy with the comedic turn at the end, and me to do the low fantasy with the bastard turn at the end.
So a big thing for me was making the mage feel scary. So having that kind of power level for a magic user within your story, whereas in mine, they're grand necromancers and there's skeleton armies, and having them be these men fighting a mage, and he just was so powerful.
Yeah.
Felt so dangerous. That it makes magic so interesting in a story when it's incredibly limited. So this, not that they're not being, he didn't have a big beard and a pointy hat. They didn't know he was a mage until it was way too late. That totally worked.
Yeah, it was initially about 1,000 words longer, because it had so much stuff in about the mage. Because one of the reasons he agrees to pay them to look after him through the journey is because he's trying to remove them from the town. Like, he's deliberately taking them with him so that he can fight them on the road. Which, I don't know, maybe I should have done it from the mage's perspective, because I liked that story as well, but I think it was better to tell it from Garstang's point of view.
I'm sure we can put it out there somewhere.
How great would it be to have
I'm sure
have a little book of 3 short stories in the same story with, like you said, but different points of view?
Different points of view, yeah.
On the last one to be the horse.
What about One-Eyed Roz? She's got a story to tell. She goes up in flames.
Not One-Eyed Roz. I want it from the perspective of a bird in a nearby tree on day 2 before any of this kicked off. Or the boy who sold his mouth. That would...
The boy who sold his mouth whilst his father was a cobbler downstairs.
Yeah. It sounds like a horrible Norwegian spy novel or something, isn't it? The boy who sold his mouth.
Oh, well, thanks guys. That was nice. I'm really keen to hear your story, Pete. Do you fancy,
you won't
away?
be once you've heard it, but let me find it on Word.
I tell you what, we tried to put Fourth Wall up at one point, and it's just had the shit kicked out of it, hasn't it, over the last few episodes.
In the box. The sun was shining, and John Webb was as happy as a pig in shit. And why wouldn't he be? Things were looking good indeed. Ramblin' Man Festival had finally gone underway, and the sun was beaming down on the field of music lovers. John supped his pint of real ale and sat on a wooden table with 2 benches on either side with his 3 mates, next to a haystack, and he realised he felt great. Summer had arrived. There was a part of John that felt he should go and see what was on the Rising stage, or even the main stage, but nah, it was the prog stage for him. The Rising stage was great for the bands who were up and coming, but to John it was the same old classic rock, a few verses, a few punchy choruses, and an unnecessary and clumsy guitar solo towards the end of each song. With 3 straight A's, a first degree in engineering, John was happy with his lot. He wondered why people would camp when they could just focus, work a little harder, and get a Freebird Deluxe caravan like he had. That's why he liked playing in his band, the Tortoise and the Yellow. The musicianship was second to none. John was proud of his songwriting, and the rest of the band understood the art of musicianship perfectly. It was harmonised perfection, and their first EP was described in a prog review as harmonised perfection, especially their 14-minute Piche de resistance, the way of the path of the hammer. Not a week ago, Bobby, the bass player, was telling John over an espresso after rehearsals that there was no such thing as a perfect performance. Come on, Zeppelin in Earl's Court in 1969, Hendrix at Woodstock, Queen at Live Aid were great, but not perfect. Just like there is no such thing as a perfect job or a perfect crime, he continued. Each job, you still have to do things you don't want to do, or a crime with DNA testing and hair analysis, you're always going to get caught. You will see perfection on Saturday, Bobby. Trust me, John had replied, and laughed. Bobby laughed with him. And now Saturday had arrived, and he was sitting on the bench with Bobby, Eric the guitarist, and Toby the keyboard player. Sammy said he may make an appearance, but with the in-laws, who knows? Fancy a trip to the prog stage then? Left-hand orcs are starting off soon. Danish, I think, Eric asked, squinting in the Kent sunshine. Yeah, well, we'll finish these and grab some more and then head over. Sound good? Perfect, John, Eric said, finishing off his drink. Bobby placed his empty pint container on the table. Ah, in the box, he said, wiping his mouth with the back of his hand. It was a phrase that in Bobby's world was quirky, in John's world was overused. If his team scored a goal, if he played the riff straight up without stopping, if he found a £5 note in his pocket, he would shout, in the box. John waited a minute, then grabbed the empty reusable cups and headed off to the bar, which was, in a tent, the smell of grass and hops. He soon returned with 4 more drinks and placed them on the table. Let's go and check them out then, and I'm telling you, Bobby, you will see perfection today. I am telling you. We'll see, Bobby said, giggling, as the 3 men got on their feet and followed John to the prog stage. Left Hand Orcs played a 40-minute set, the music reminding John of the band Focus, without the yodeling. Up next, Blue Purple Winwood came on, their Hammond organ a little too brash for John. The sun was still blaring down on the Maidstone Music Festival, and the smell of burgers was diffusing through the air with the sound of the toilet door slapping closed and open. Told you we wouldn't see perfection today, Johnny boy, Billy shouts over. Greatness, yes. Perfection, no. Whose round is it? Yours, Eric. Sweet. In the box. The 4 mates continue watching Blue Purple Winwood and decide to visit the main stage for a slight change of scenery and to take a break from being in a sea of camping chairs. The main stage had 4 bearded men and a Confederate flag as their backdrop. John assumed they were from Hull or somewhere. The 4 mates and band members enjoy their drinks, enjoy the sunshine and watch and listen to the music surrounding them. Overall, a great summer's day and a great summer music festival. As a bearded lead singer sips a can of lager and advises the crowd to sing along to the Southern rock anthem, John smiles at himself. See, I told you they wouldn't be perfect, Bobby had said to him earlier. I told you it wouldn't be a perfect day. But he was wrong. Perfection was there, ever present. You just had to find it. It wasn't easy. If it was, everybody would gain it. But John knew he wanted perfection, and that's why he always managed to grab it, no matter what the effort. He smiled to himself and took another sip of his drink. The pellet was sunk into Bobby's ale easy enough when in the bar tent, and although Bobby won't be found dead until tomorrow, John was sure they will find no motive for him to murder his friend. And why should they? He was a good friend after all, and a hell of a bassist. No motive, no weapon. He was sure it was the perfect crime, and that in itself restores John's faith in order and perfection. Bring on the rest of the day's in the box.
Bloody hell.
Jesus Christ, the turn!
That's my short story inspired by Nico being a rock musician. and my hatred of prog rock names.
I was absolutely thrilled by every single prog song name and band name you came out with in that. It was sheer delight.
The Confederate flag behind those blokes from Hull was the...
I can't bear it. It's one of my many. I've got many pet hates in the world. The Confederate flag's one of them, and Confederate flag people from Hull. Not necessarily from Hull. It's even more. I was at Ramblin' Man. I was comparing on the Rising stage last year, and they were reconstructing the Civil War, and maybe just because I've got dark skin and a mixed race, I found it very scary. And I just thought, this can't be right. And I thought they were going to shoot me. But, and it just-
Crikey.
you know what? I just thinking, this is a bit. And I spoke to the guys and said, this is a bit odd. And he kind of went, yeah, I suppose it is. Yeah, it's a bit unnecessary. But yeah, so I've got a little. I just thought I'd just get all my little objections out there in my little short story.
No, that's what it's for. The soapbox is there.
Therapy.
Yeah, I really enjoyed the descriptions of the sort of summer's day as well, especially because we've been in this like fucking lockdown for so long. It's actually been really difficult to spend time with friends in the way that you described. So that was actually really nice. I was sort of taken away by it to a certain degree, and then obviously the great jokes about the bands were really funny, and then the turn at the end. I was already worrying during it that, you know, there's always that like secret little bit of social anxiety that everyone gets to a certain degree of like, am I talking too much? Am I repeating myself? And so that this guy was basically the impression that I got was that this guy was gonna kill his friend because he kept on saying in the box. Is that right?
Oh, he's just gonna kill his friend because he could, I think.
Because he could.
Right. Because he could, and you get away with it because it was a perfect. I suppose the key was, I suppose, for me, is because it was a perfect crime, and they talk about perfect crimes, and surely the perfect crime is because why would anybody guess it was him?
Oh, he was a bassist.
He was a bassist, and yeah.
Oh no, I thoroughly enjoyed that one, Pete. Thank you very much.
It was really, really good fun. So I wasn't massively surprised to hear you write about music because you have done that before. You have 3 books.
Yeah, it's only because it was actually weirdly I wrote my book about music and I wrote that, and that's only 2 things I've ever written about music. Although I'll probably end up writing more because I'm kind of surrounded by it. But it's just that case of write what you know, because I don't know much. I'll be honest, and that's one of the few things I kind of know. I don't even know much about music. I know what a haystack looks like and a guitar sounds like, and that's about it.
Well, you are deep in the heart of the UK music scene. You absolutely are.
Yeah.
It's not very often now I go somewhere to play with Dead Man's Whiskey and you aren't already there being more important than we are.
I'm never more important. I'm just there lingering around like some sort of, like the 2 old guys in a Muppet Show. I'm always there.
No, you're useful. You're someone I can look at and make sure that reality is still happening. Pete, I'm not... everything's all right, yeah? Cool. So, you've got 3 books.
Yeah, well,
That's one thing.
I've got, 2.5. So I've got...
2.5.
I've got a book, my first one, Resurrection Mill, that I was really proud of, to be honest. And I'm not a writer by any, as you can tell, by any stretch of the imagination. But I think, like many people, an idea came to me, and I thought, God, I would like to write that down in a book and have that on a bookshelf. And then I got quite stubborn and said, well, why not? Do you know what I mean? Why? I just, my biggest fear is to kind of go, well, I wish I did that. So I wrote a book about gravediggers in Scotland, and that was I had that in my bag, and I was kind of sold it, and then I did the music stuff, and then I figured out, well, really should have a book about music because I'm at gigs selling books that are nothing to do with music. So I wrote the one about the band, the call, and the third one isn't really my book. I can't take really any credit for it. I've just got it. It's out on Amazon, and I just wrote a novella based on an album by the Rocket Dolls, and it inspired me. And then I just put online, is anybody else inspired by this album? Who's want to write some short stories or poems? And I got 10 or 12 people coming in, so I put it all together, put it on Amazon, and they're really happy. They're really inspired because they've got a book with their stuff in it. So it's win-win. But I can't take much credit for that one. Really, it's my idea, but I didn't. Most of the inputs are other people's.
All right, let's give you something you can take credit for. You just did this might carbon date this a little bit, but you just did an online stand-up special because you are in fact a comedian.
Yes, that was fun but weird. It was an online gig is always weird. This is the way of the world now, isn't it? I won't say the new normal because it won't be. But it was just a case of doing an hour set with a couple of TV cameras. And there was hundreds of people tuned in. Hundreds of people got a ticket. It was incredible. But I didn't see these hundreds of people. I just saw like a couple men with cameras. So it was a strange one. But it was great. It was great fun.
I've heard that some comedians have been doing it so the same kind of way, but they've had a couple of their audience members have agreed to have webcams on them, so that they can actually get a bit of feedback, so that they can know if a joke has landed, or even possibly get heckled. I guess if imagine getting heckled during a live stream.
Yeah, that's right. But I don't know. I've done what. So usually when you do a gig, when you got new material or doing a tour, You go. Don't live in London now, but I've lived in London for the last 30 years or so. You kind of go and do the open mic circuit in London. People know you, so they give you a gig. You practice new stuff. You get the reaction, and you know what works, and you tune it in like anything. But over this lockdown, obviously, I had a whole new set written, and I had no feedback. And I went on a couple of Zoom sort of meetings with comics, and I put it out there just for a couple of minutes, and they said, "Yeah, it's great, well done." But it's you can't, you know what it's like. You can't feel it. You can hear where the laughs hit and not. So yeah, it was great, and I really enjoyed it. And I'm glad I did it because I got to film it. I filmed a DVD the day before, the day of it. But it's just odd having no feedback at all, because you just in your head it's human nature. You just think, well, it's not funny. It's failing.
That horrible feeling where you feel like you're speaking to the void.
It is. Do you know when you're in a conversation with someone in a party or whatever, and you're halfway through a sentence and you realise that everyone's listening and you're just talking utter shit? That is that kind of feeling.
That has happened to me before.
So it's a strange one, and it was odd, but it was. I'm glad I did it. It's one of these things I wanted to do, and I'm glad I did it, and it was an experience, and it was fun, but I just wish there was the 200 people that bought tickets. I wish they were there, And it's really nice to get messages afterwards saying, "I love that joke. I love this bit. I love this bit," and that's great and brilliant. I really appreciate it. But I just wish you could see their face smiling or laughing, or.
So with all of these creative projects and stuff, we've actually got a question for you here, which is going to kick us off with the question, which is, what are you reading right now? But I'm actually kind of interested to see if that's got anything to do with whether it informs what you're doing or whether it feeds into your comedy.
No, I'm an avid reader. I read. I always read. I try to read. I don't get an hour a day reading in, but I try to. I love reading. Reading is my favourite thing in the world. I love it. And I've always got a book on the go. I'm a funny one, and unlike yourself, I was listening to you before, and I need one book. I have to have one book on the go, just one. What I'm reading now is quite embarrassing, but if I was in my 20s, I would not admit it. But now I'm in my 40s, I don't care. So just to justify it, I've just finished Wolf Hall by Hilary Mantel.
Oh, that's a good book.
It is a good book, but you know what, right? I read it, and I loved it, and I loved it, and I thought, wow, she's an incredible writer. And at first, it took me a while to get into it, but I just fancied something a bit. When you finish it, you go, I just want to relax a little bit. Next week, I'm back to work. It's going to be hectic. And I'm justifying it here. Do you remember this TV series, V? With the spaceships and the lizards?
No.
Oh, yeah.
No.
It was the best miniseries ever. It was 2 hours each series, 10 episodes, 5 episodes. And it was all about spaceships coming down. And there were really lizard people, right? In the 80s. It was amazing. And I was about 13 at the end, and we watched it, and it was... When you at the time, it was the first thing to have the big spaceship over New York, and they all came down as human beings, and then you discovered Diana was the main one, and she was a lizard, and she ate mice. It was fucking great, and I've always wanted to.
Mental.
It's V. Check it out, V. It was the best TV show ever in my life, ever, and there's a mini series afterwards, but the V itself was amazing, right? Oh, V, I was just great. And I've always wanted to read a book. I thought, I just want to read a big dumb book about a spaceship, right? But usually they're just rubbish. And I've just discovered a series that I'm reading, right? In between the Hilary Mantel trilogy. This one is book 4, called Annihilation. What They've Lost, We Must Find. It's proper rubbish, by Sean Platt and Johnny B. Truen. But it's amazing. It's not rubbish. There's 7 books, and it's about a UFO invasion, and the characters are one-dimensional, and every 5 pages, an alien gets punched in the face. But you know what? It makes me happy.
Oh, that's what it should be. That's what it should be.
I will absolutely never judge that.
But when I wouldn't have read it. Well, it would have been like kind of porn. I would have like, oh my God, I can't, nobody can see me. Like the whole Harry Potter book covers. No one can see me reading this. Now I just don't give a shit. It's like, yeah, I'm going to read, I don't care. I don't. Terry Pratchett, I think, you mentioned it before. I loved the old covers, the messy ones, but they tried to make them a bit civilized. And you think, no, it's great. I think he's an amazing author, but we don't need to show us people we're civilized. We can just read what we want.
Well, speaking about reading what you want, what do you think is the best book you've ever read, Pete?
Well, that's a tough one, because there's so many. That's like saying like the best album. I think weirdly some books really resonate with you, but you don't think they will. So Wuthering Heights, I loved. Absolutely loved that book. I read it once every year. I just think it's amazing. I suppose, which is a bit of a cheat, the Dark Tower series by Stephen King, I find incredible. The Stand, I found incredible. I loved sort of in plays, like I remember reading Willie Russell plays. I love the Arthur Miller plays America. There's his play. Just find it quite emotive. So I think probably Wuthering Heights, but then it sounds really intelligent then, and actually I probably think The Stand by Stephen King.
I don't know. Wuthering Heights is a cracking book. Like it's a real firework book.
It's just so I love it. It's just like all emotion. Everything about a book is just emotion, and I just don't like reading. You know, sometimes you read like Wolf Hall was great and it's amazing, but it didn't touch me. I didn't cry. I didn't laugh out loud. I didn't go.
It's a little
God.
cold, isn't it?
You know what I mean? Yeah, it's a bit like a textbook in a way, but you know it's like an album. You know, when you listen to an album, you go, wow, that's like, I suppose, Steve Vai or whatever. You go, that's technically incredible. But I'm a little bit bored after the third song because I know what you can do. Show me some emotion. That's probably unfair on Steve Vai. If he's listening, Stevie, sorry.
Although the TV show for Wolf Hall was fantastic as well. I know we're all about books here, but the Mark Rylance led cast was like, it really brought it to life.
I will watch it. I always read the book first, and that's probably my stubbornnness. I've never seen the Harry Potter films. I've read the books, but I've never really seen the films. I've seen a bit.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and I should, but I loved the book. To be honest, I thought I would absolutely despise the books, and I loved them. You know, I loved them. I read through them. I was really, you know, but I never read. I should see films like certain books. One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. I've read that book about 12 times, but I've never seen the film, and I should do because I know it's a classic film. But I kind of feel I don't want to ruin it.
It's a very different experience to the book, I'd say. The film, very, very different experience.
So that's the best book you've ever read. So we sort of settled somewhere between Wuthering Heights and the Dark Tower series, right?
Yeah,
Did you
so.
lean more
Robin Hobb
towards Dark
series.
Tower?
I think I'm one of these people that the minute they finish the book and it's great, you go, God, that was the best book I've ever read. But yeah, I think so. I think you're, yeah.
Okay. So to flip it and really, really dig down into the mud, what's the worst book you've ever read?
Oh, well, I've read. I'll tell you what it is, right? I loved, for one, you wouldn't think it, because there's no pattern here. I loved Richard Adams' Watership Down and The Plague Dogs. I cried during The Plague Dogs. I think it was a great book. It's about two dogs that escape an animal lab. Yeah, it's obviously fiction, but, you know, Annie, you talk about that. But, so I loved the Watership Down book, and I loved The Plague Dogs book. I loved the way he kind of represented the animals. And there was a book called Shardik he wrote about a bear, and it was utter tosh. And, you know, I find it really difficult not to stop reading a book. I feel like it's a battle and I'm losing. So I'll continue on reading it. It was like, do you remember a series called Duncton Wood? It was about moles. And there was a sex scene, and I'm like, I don't want to read about moles having sex. Page 147, I remember it well. But
no kink shaming here. People want to enjoy moles having sex. They should enjoy moles having sex.
If you're into molehole, that's you.
Molehole.
So yeah, Shardik was the worst one. Although I've just finished, I say that, before I read Wolf Hall, when I started the first three of this spaceship book, I read a book, which are not the worst ones, but the Kim Stanley Robinson, the Mars trilogy. Now, if it wasn't in lockdown, I would have gave up on them. And they're beautifully written, and I'm really interested in Mars and space travel. But they were so technical, I just didn't enjoy them. Do you know that? It was like reading a manual if you're like me and I've got no interest. So that's not the worst, but it's kind of what the worst. It was just that kind of got off with. And I bought the trilogy, so I refused, and I thought I'm not going to give Amazon money and not waste it. So I read them all, but it was hard going. Do you know when you're reading the book and you think, right, I'm going to do 15 pages and take a break? That's not good, is it? But we all do it, I think.
No.
Do you have a favourite literary character?
I hate saying this because I think it's a bit of a cop-out, right? But I think it might be your man from, what's his name, from the Robin Hobb series, Fitz.
Fitz Chivalry, yeah.
I love that. I love Robin Hobb. I love fantasy. Everything I wanted to read in it because it's just the typical, you know, there's nothing new there particularly. It's about a boy starts in the kitchen and Fitz, and he's that kind of tragic hero. And I think he's just a perfect character, really. You can talk about Randall Flagg and Stephen King and stuff, but I just think, and of course Heathcliff from Wuthering Heights is one of my favourite because he's such a nasty bugger, but I love him.
He's not your favourite. He's Kate Bush's favourite.
He's Kate Bush's favourite.
Firmly
one
established.
part I got annoyed. I shouldn't get annoyed at so trivial things, but I did. Is when Cliff Richard said, "I'm going to play Heathcliff because he brings out my mischievous side," and I thought, no, he's not mischievous. He's a prick. He's horrible. He's nasty. Oh. You know, that's the point. That's the beauty of him. But then you don't hate him, and I just love characters that that are bad and horrendous. Like, I suppose, I like your man in Breaking Bad. You know, you look at him and go, I should disagree with you, but I don't. And I love when authors give these bad characters a human side.
Unlike Cliff Richard, who, regardless of how much good stuff he claims to do, I hate him. So
You have to be careful with Cliff Richard, because I had a Cliff Richard joke in my set when I was on the London circuit, and I was told not to do it because his people are out suing, and I thought that can't be right. And funnily enough, a week later there was two men in suits awaiting my Cliff Richard joke.
His people are out suing.
And they went out and they did. I wouldn't have believed it if it wasn't. I was warned 4 or 5 times by the comics in, and one of the owners of the club said, "Mate, don't do that joke. I know it's your funniest one, but don't do it." And then he pointed to 2 men and said, "They're here for that." And I felt quite popular. I thought, do you know what? But I was still on stage thinking, it's still. Then it was a new test. I wonder if I could just make them laugh, because it was quite a good gag. But I didn't risk
Just
it.
change the name to Riff Clitchard.
And then you're just thinking, if you're going to send out people like on a stand-up comedy set of my standard, which isn't much at all, and you're going to take offence at that, what are you hiding? But that's maybe Cliff. If you're listening, nothing, just shit music.
yeah, stop being a nonce, Cliff.
Savage.
So
can't wait to be
so
sued.
that's it. Cliff Richard and Heathcliff, my least favourite pop artist and my favourite fictional character.
So if I like this question. This one's one of my favourite ones. If you could adapt a book to any other medium, what would it be and why? Is the sort of important bit there. I think.
Oh, that's interesting. No, I've not really thought of that. I suppose. Well, I always look at these big fantasy books and think, why isn't the film? And then thought, well, it wouldn't do it justice. But then I would love to see music. I mean, I don't know if you've ever had the pleasure. I went to see an amateur dramatic version of Alien, which was so bad it was beautiful.
Did you say Alien?
Alien, the first movie, there's an amateur dramatic version of it, right? So me and my mate saw it. Maybe about it's factual. I was shitting you about this, right? It's not. And it was so, and it wasn't meant to be a comedy, but it was so good that at the second half, when everyone came back in, there was a lot less people in the audience, which made us giggle even more. But it wasn't meant to be it was so bad, right? Because it's amateur dramatics, they all had like the boiler suits, obviously in the Alien films and the spaceship. And you think they even got to the Alien yet? But the thing is, because it's amateur, they've got no money, so all the boiler suits kind of work and don't work, and then the Alien itself was a bit shit. Well, not a bit, but I loved it. And I just thinking, actually, maybe if we could get like a really serious book, like an author who I don't particularly like, Wilbur Smith, and just make his book into a shit musical and force him to watch a Jeffrey Archer book, Jeffrey Archer. Make him watch. It won't be as bad as his books, to be honest. I've not read it. I know it's not fair, but but a shit musical, a really bad musical. I think that would work really well.
That is definitely one of the better answers to that question.
That is absolutely stunning.
But then the important bit there is that, and then force them to watch it, and that's the reason why.
Yeah, watch your shit. Watch it, and the matinee and the evening performance. Watch them both.
Oh, you don't want to feed them a matinee. They might shoot themselves between the two.
But we're going to ask, and this is I think this is a tough one personally. When did you last cry reading a book?
I cried quite a lot reading the book. I cried reading that bloody Shardik, that was for sure. I think do you know what? I keep on going back. I feel bad because I'm just in the same thing. But I think the Robin Hood. Have you read the Robin Hood books?
I've read them all. Yeah, I think Nick's yet to.
I
haven't quite exposed him to them yet.
I want to say, but when you get to the very, because I think, in my opinion, there's like 4 or 5 little mini series, and the penultimate one I didn't really thoroughly love, the Dragons one. But then when I got to the very end and all tied together, I remember the very last couple pages. Oh, I cried like a bit. I put it down, and it was really. Yeah. I thought, what a perfect ending. I cried for. I thought it was great. I thought, wow, I wanted to go and find Robin Hood and give her a big hug. Really,
yeah.
And I think that's what I like about fantasy, because you follow the characters and you get to know them. And I like that. I like that in a book.
She was, I mean, because those ones are all written in the first person as well. She'd spent so many years in that character. So to sort of wrap up, the final book was, I assume, really emotional. Yeah, I wept like a child during that book anyway. So I totally agree with you. That was a very sad book.
Well, now I'm not going to read it.
I just think it's great, and I've not read a lot of fantasy. I do read Tad Williams. I've not read Game of Thrones. But that's not for any particular reason. That's because they're not finished yet. And years ago, I read the Amtrak War series, and the author, and it's not his fault, and I have to be less selfish here, because he died, and I'm sure his family were really upset, but he hadn't finished the last book.
Selfish bastard went and died.
Well, that's it. Do you know, and you're thinking, and I've learned a lesson, so I don't read books until I know they're going to be finished. I know that's really sad, but my Amtrak Wars experience as a kid, you know, bastard.
Right. So the question that we like to end on is to ask our guests to give us one really uninteresting fact about themselves.
Disinteresting.
We've had some feedback that we were previously using the wrong word, which is disinteresting. So we now say it every time. So yeah, disinteresting, uninteresting, however you want to interpret it.
Non-interesting.
I suppose the key one is, which most people don't know, is I try when people see me at gigs and stuff, they think it's all rock and roll and excitement and birds, booze and bad language. But actually, by day, I teach science, which is exceptionally dull. You know, and I love being on that stage, and I love doing comedy, and I love getting pissed, and I love doing all this exciting stuff. But most of the day, I'm standing there talking about atoms.
Do you teach a specific branch of science?
Well, biology, A-level, but now, in the school I'm at now, it's just all three of them at GCSE. Okay. So it's a bit, I say teaching science, just telling kids to shut up.
Are you a grunger, sir?
Yeah, they all say that. Are you an emo? It's like, mate, I'm 47. One of the kids, I know, because I was listening to the Rolling Stones, and I came in, the Rolling Stones was on, and he came in and goes, "Who's that rubbish? They're not gonna be famous." And I thought, do you know what? Kids know nothing. Kids know nothing. We know that. So yeah, I give up on kids.
Well, I was about to say that I suspect that those kids are actually really lucky to have someone who's a comedian, a writer, and is into like sci-fi exploration stuff for a science teacher. But it sounds like they don't deserve you.
Yeah,
so,
kids are pricks, mate.
I think kids just care, and there's something I do mean to put kids down. Kids just kind of they've got their own life, they've got their own world, and they don't really think about anything. They don't care about anything. The kids will get excited when they see you in Asda.
Yeah.
They go, "Oh my God, so you in Asda? What were you doing in Asda?" And you go, "I was shopping for food." Oh my. They don't, you know, they it's weird.
I'm going to be honest, Pete. If they didn't understand that you need to shop for food, you are a shit biology teacher.
I haven't got to that, but yeah, I'm still on the chemistry bit. But yeah, they are kids, all kids. People say, Whitney Houston said, kids are the future of tomorrow. They're not. They're just idiotic.
I have to say, Pete, it's been a fucking thrill having you here.
Thanks.
It's been lovely. I've really enjoyed laughing so much.
Talking 2 hours about books is great. Great.
This is the most fun I've had in weeks. It's been really, really lovely. If people want to find your stuff, reach out to you, get, tweeted at by you, where can they go?
The tweet handle, is that right? Is that like the thing? It's Pete K. Malley 5 on Facebook, and my website www.petekmalley.co.uk. But Facebook probably the best, because unless I've not been on Facebook too much today, because it's just full of people complaining about the new Facebook. So I'll give it a couple of days, and then I'll get back on it. And then Pete K. Malley on Facebook or any socials. Look at that. I'm so in with the youth. I use the word socials and not social media.
Well, anyone on your socials, we will pop some links to Pete's stuff where you can find Pete and what Pete's doing.
We're just talking rubbish and doing stuff.
Ruining the next generation. So everyone else out there on the socials as well, if you're listening, if you like what you hear, please share us around. It does us a huge favour every time that you share a link to the podcast, because even one person clicking it means we're not screaming into the void for no reason. Unlike normally.
Yeah. Thanks again, Pete.
Yes. A final thank you to Pete, and I think we owe another one more thank you, don't we? Another one more. That's a new thing I've invented there.
To the fine patrons.
To the lovely patrons. One of whom Pete knows. That's weird. So a big lovely thank you to Mr. Gary Laird, who Pete knows. Mm-hmm. Matthew McLaren, who is lovely.
It sounds like a Scottish rugby team you're mentioning.
Centre back line.
It's going to get worse. And Scott Byrne, who is in fact a child, as his name implies in Scotland.
I feel like we need a drawing of these all being like fullbacks for Scotland or something. Though.
Yeah, they actually remind me of your imagery you had on your stories. You know, the barbarian you were talking about.
Well, in that case, Pete, you're definitely the hooker for us.
My, what an adventure. You'll have to come back another time. Our adventurers are off now in search of more stories. If you'd like to meet our adventuring party, you can reach them by Raven at Bookcase Tiny. Or, alternatively, you can help them on Patreon to fund their adventures. Those tavern ales don't pay for themselves, I'm afraid. But thank you for joining us. Now get out of my wizard tower. I have wizardy things to do. Bloody do-good as always coming round here wanting something. I'm gonna get my